You know how we love to dig into different perspectives on things? Well, get ready, because we're really going deep this time, challenging how we think about value.
Sounds intriguing.
This time, we're diving into the world of economic anthropology.
Oh, I like where this is going. Always a fascinating lens.
Right. We're specifically looking at unpacking Economic Anthropology 1, exchange and consumption.
Excellent choice. There's so much to uncover there.
Exactly. So get ready to rethink what you consider valuable. We're talking fascinating examples from like the Trobriand Islands to, well, your next trip to the grocery store.
I'm in. It's always surprising how these things connect.
That's the beauty of it, right? So to kick things off, we often think of economics as this, well, rigid thing, numbers, logic, that kind of thing.
Yeah, the cold, hard facts, as they say.
But when you look at how different cultures actually value and exchange things,
Things get really interesting, don't they?
totally, it becomes clear that economics isn't just numbers, it's totally intertwined with culture.
Completely. It's embedded in everything we do.
So it's like what we consider valuable. It's not always about, just money or profit.
Absolutely. It goes so much deeper than that.
Right.
Take the Trobriand Islanders, for example. Have you heard of their Kula trade?
I have. It always seems so different from like typical trading systems.
It really is. They exchange these incredibly elaborate shell necklaces and bracelets.
Yeah, the craftsmanship is amazing. But it's the meaning behind it, right?
Exactly. It's not about practical use or even really accumulating wealth in the way we usually think about it.
So what is it about then?
Social status, primarily. It's about prestige, building relationships, even achieving a kind of fame, you could say.
Wow. So it's less about the objects themselves and more about what they represent within that culture.
You got it. It's social currency. Think about anthropologist Bronislaw Malinowski, who studied the Trobriand Islanders in depth. He wrote about the Kula trade in his book.
Yeah.
And the Islanders. They were incredibly proud to be featured in his work.
That's wild. So that recognition, it had value to them.
Absolutely. It gave them a form of renown, of social
Okay.
standing. And that challenged the whole notion of a purely rational economy, you know?
Right. It's not just about profit. There are other factors at play.
Exactly. The Trobriand Islanders showed that economic systems, they can be deeply, deeply embedded in a culture's values. And sometimes social standing, well, that's its own kind of currency.
It's fascinating. And it makes you think about other aspects of economics we often overlook, like gift economies.
Ah, yes. Gift economies.
Yeah.
Perfect example of how things aren't always about a direct exchange.
Right. It's not just, you give me this, I give you that.
Not at all.
Yeah.
In a gift economy, the act of giving and receiving, it creates and reinforces social bonds, obligations. It's much bigger than just the objects themselves.
It's like what anthropologists call total social phenomena, right?
Right.
Something as simple as a gift, it carries all this cultural weight.
Exactly. And we can see this in the Trobriand Islands too, not just with the Kula trade. They have this system of exchanging yams, especially important after harvest. And get this, a man who harvests yams. He doesn't keep them for his own family.
Wait, really? Who do they give them to then?
His sister's husband.
Wow, that's unexpected. Why is that?
It seems counterintuitive at first, right?
Yeah.
But those yams, they represent more than food. They're social bonds, obligations, even power dynamics. It's about keeping the peace, maintaining those relationships.
So they're giving away something valuable, but it's actually strengthening their ties to others.
Precisely. A completely different way of thinking about wealth and generosity.
Wow.
And this total social phenomena thing. It's not just the Trobriand Islanders. Plenty of cultures have traditions that might seem economically irrational,
But they actually reveal something much deeper.
you got it. Like the concept of inalienable possessions.
Mhm.
Things so valuable, they're basically priceless.
Priceless. What kind of things?
Could be a family heirloom. Not just worth money, but carries generations of history. Or a sacred object. Or even a skill passed down, something you can't just buy.
It's about identity, isn't it? Like preserving something essential to them.
It certainly is. And it challenges our own assumptions, doesn't it? We're so used to equating value with, well, a price tag.
Right. If it's not for sale, is it even valuable?
Many cultures would say it's the most valuable thing there is. The things that connect us, define us. Tradition, belonging.
So much more complex than just what's in our wallets.
Exactly. And it gets even more interesting when we look at how those values are displayed, put into action.
Okay, you're going to have to elaborate on that. Give me an example.
Let's talk about the potlatch.
Oh, wow. The potlatch ceremony. Okay, yeah, I know a little about this. Those indigenous groups in North America, right? Isn't it all about like extravagant gift giving?
It is, but there's so much more to it than that. Imagine a society where giving away, even destroying your wealth, that's a sign of power.
Wait, hold on. Destroying your wealth. How does that make sense? Why would anyone do that?
In the potlatch system, it's all about asserting social standing. Chiefs would hold these huge feasts, give away enormous amounts of food, blankets, copper plates. The more you gave, the higher your status.
So it's like a strategic kind of generosity almost. You're showing off how much you have by being able to give so much away.
Exactly. It's a classic example of what anthropologists call agonistic generosity. It's not just altruism, it's calculated. It's about influence, power.
And I've heard that sometimes they would even destroy wealth as part of this, like literally destroy it.
Absolutely. They'd burn piles of blankets, throw copper plates into the sea.
Right.
But it wasn't seen as wasteful. It was symbolic.
Symbolic of what?
Their ability to transcend material wealth. Like it held no power over them.
That's incredible. So going against like basic economic logic actually reinforces their status in this system.
You see different cultures, completely different views of wealth, generosity, power. And these systems, they don't exist in isolation either. Let's shift gears geographically for a moment, talk about the Tiv people of Nigeria. They had a pre-colonial economic system that colonialism, well, it completely changed the game for them.
Oh, that does sound interesting. How did the Tiv people view economics before colonialism?
Imagine not one economic system, but three, each with its own rules, its own values.
3 separate economic systems. Okay, I'm hooked. Tell me more about this.
So you had your subsistence sphere, that was for everyday goods. Then you had the prestige sphere. Think status items, markers of social stamp.
Okay, so that's 2. What was the third sphere?
The third one might surprise you. It was a sphere for exchanging people.
Exchanging people. Now, I've never heard of that before. What did that entail exactly?
It primarily involved the exchange of wives and children. Now, I know that might sound jarring to our modern ears, but it was a highly structured system. And it's important to remember the goal wasn't about thinking of people as property. It was about forming alliances, ensuring the lineage continued.
So less like a straight trade and more about social contracts with like deeper meanings and implications.
Exactly. And it's interesting that Tiv considered this exchange of people the highest sphere, something we might instinctively recoil from. For them, it held a very different meaning. Now, alongside this, you had the prestige sphere, which was...
So this is where those luxury goods or status symbols came into play.
You're exactly right. We're talking cattle, brass rods, even magical items, markers of social standing similar to those Kula valuables we talked about. And lastly, you have that subsistence sphere, which...
Yeah, that's the more straightforward one, right? Like food, tools, everyday necessities.
Exactly. Now, here's what's fascinating. These 3 spheres, closed systems, couldn't trade a cow for a bag of grain, for example.
They were valued on totally different scales.
Precisely. It'd be like paying rent with a rare stamp collection. Just didn't compute.
Our system of money for everything seems so simple in comparison. What happened when colonialism became a factor?
Well, with colonialism came the introduction of general-purpose money, in this case, pounds and pence. And that, well, it threw the Tiv's existing system for a loop.
Instead of separate spheres, suddenly everything had a monetary value.
Exactly. Those spheres were forced into a single unified market. Suddenly, a cow and a bag of grain, directly comparable. Even a wife's value could be measured in pounds sterling.
Wow, talk about a culture shock. That must have been a huge adjustment for the Tiv people.
Absolutely. It really was. Many of them, well, they felt like it cheapened their traditions, like their social structures were suddenly, I don't know, less important.
Right, because now you could just put a price on everything.
Exactly. It's a classic example of how trying to impose a new economic system, well-meaning or not, it can backfire. It can have all these unintended consequences.
It really makes you think about the true cost of, what we consider progress.
Absolutely. And it raises all these questions about globalization, doesn't it? This pressure to conform to a single economic model.
But then again, money does let us trade on a much bigger scale, right? There are definitely some upsides, too.
Oh, absolutely. Money as a universal equivalent, a way to compare values across cultures. That's been a game changer for connecting people in ways we couldn't have imagined before.
So it's like a trade-off, right? This double-edged sword.
In many ways it is. Which brings us to another layer of this whole thing, this idea of money as, well, a kind of information technology.
Hold on, information technology. Now that's a new way to think about it. How is money Like information technology.
Well, think about what money does. It lets us put a number on things, right?
Yeah.
Quantify and compare values across huge distances, like a shared language for exchange, which is incredibly powerful.
Okay, I see where you're going with this. But if it's a shared language, doesn't that risk, I don't know, erasing some of the things that make cultures unique?
Exactly. That's the potential downside. Standardization can lead to homogenization,
Mm.
a flattening of diverse values, ways of life.
It's like that old saying, when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Perfectly put. And this leads us to the whole relationship between money, power, and debt. Now we're talking about something with huge implications on a global scale.
Because it's not just individuals who are in debt, right? It's entire countries.
Exactly. It's all connected. This web of financial obligations that ties us all together.
It's like this hidden system running in the background, shaping so much of our lives.
It really is. And you can't talk about money on a global scale without talking about the legacy of colonialism.
It's impossible to ignore, right? It completely reshaped economics around the world.
Exactly. And the effects, still felt today in so many ways.
It's like when you think about food, for example. So much of what we eat today is a direct result of those colonial trade routes.
You're absolutely right. The Columbian Exchange, for example, that had a massive impact on what people ate all over the world.
Can you remind us what the Columbian Exchange was exactly?
Sure. Essentially, it's this huge exchange of plants, animals, even diseases, started after Columbus's voyages, back and forth between the Americas and the Old World.
So it wasn't just like finding new spices, it completely changed what people were eating on both sides of the ocean.
Absolutely. Think about it. Before 1492, there were no potatoes in Europe.
No potatoes. Wow. So no French fries, no mashed potatoes.
None whatsoever. They were completely unknown. And tomatoes. Those came from the Americas, too.
Really? I always thought of tomatoes as being so, I don't know, Italian.
Nope, originally from the Americas. It's amazing, isn't it? The things we take for granted, they have these whole histories.
Right. Like, where do we even draw the line of what's a local food anymore? I mean, even the banana.
Exactly, the banana. Originally from Southeast Asia, now a huge crop in the Americas because of the Columbian Exchange.
It's like each ingredient has its own passport, its own story to tell about how it got here.
It does. But it's important to remember, this exchange, it wasn't always equal or beneficial.
Right. Because colonialism wasn't just about, sharing new foods. There was a lot of exploitation involved.
Exactly. Power imbalances were built into the system from the start. Along with the exchange of goods came the exploitation of people and resources.
It's like what they say, right? History is written by the victors.
That's often the case, unfortunately.
Well,
And even something as seemingly harmless as, say, sugar, well, it has a pretty dark side.
Oh, absolutely. Sugar plantations, the slave trade, it's all interconnected.
Precisely. And anthropologist Sidney Mincy explored this in his book, Sweetness and Power, how sugar, something we just put in our coffee, it became this symbol of power and the complexities of the global economy.
It's a good reminder that our everyday choices, even something as simple as what we eat, well, they have these larger implications.
They really do. Our food choices aren't just personal preferences. They're connected to these bigger systems of power, inequality that have shaped the world we live in.
It really makes you think, like all this time we've been talking about these big systems, global exchange, but it really comes down to what we choose to put in our shopping carts, doesn't it?
It does. Our economic choices, they tell a story. They're a form of communication. What we value, what we want, even what we're afraid of. It's all reflected in those choices.
Wow, I've never thought about it like that. Economic choices as communication, that's pretty profound.
Right. Economic anthropology, it can really make you see the familiar in a whole new light. It makes you stop and think, why do I do that? Like we talked about with the TIV and their separate spheres of value.
Yeah.
Our systems might not be so rigid, but we all have them.
We do. Different things matter to us, where we put our time, energy, money.
Exactly. And those choices, they speak volumes.
Yeah. So how do we get better at being aware of that, of making choices that, I don't know, are more aligned with what we actually care about?
It starts with curiosity, honestly, just asking questions. Next time you're about to buy something, anything, pause for a second. Where did this come from? Who made it? What went into getting this on the shelf in front of me?
Yeah. And then it gets even more interesting when you start asking, okay, what does this purchase support? What values, what systems am I contributing to with this decision?
Exactly. Because you're right, it is like voting with your wallet. You're casting a vote for something.
And it's not about being perfect or like knowing all the answers. It's more about just starting the conversation.
Absolutely. The awareness itself is huge. Just that shift in thinking from passive consumer to, hey, I have a role in this.
Because even small changes multiplied over millions of people, that's where the real power lies, right?
I completely agree. It's that
Okay.
collective shift in consciousness
Yeah.
that can lead to lasting change.
Yeah. Wow, this whole conversation, this whole deep dive, it's been really eye-opening. I feel like I have a whole new way of looking at not just, economics, but the world in general.
That's fantastic to hear. That's what we hope for with these conversations, to spark curiosity, to challenge assumptions, and to inspire people to engage with the world around them in a more thoughtful way.
Well, you've definitely succeeded. I'm looking at everything differently now, from my morning coffee to those yams I always buy at the store.
That's what it's all about, realizing that these seemingly everyday things, they're all part of something bigger. We're all connected, and our choices matter.
They really do.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, I think we're going to have to wrap it up. This has been an incredible conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your expertise with us today.
It was my pleasure, truly. These topics, they're so important to discuss. The more we understand about the interconnectedness of our world, well, the better equipped we are to create a more just and sustainable future.
Couldn't have said it better myself. A huge thank you to our listeners for joining us on this deep dive. We'll be back next time with another fascinating topic, so be sure to tune in for that. Until then, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep those amazing conversations going.